happens and you have an urgent question, there's a little icon at the bottom of the computer users where you can raise your hand like this, and it'll show me that you need my attention. So we are in Numbers chapter 5. Now we are still in the Pentateuch, which is the 5 first books of the Bible, all said to be authored by Moses. Leviticus was a whole long journey through the law, specifically geared at the Levites who would be leading the community of faith. Now, Numbers is a journey from the Mount Sinai to the Promised Land, and it has 5 stages, and we're still in the first stage where they're issuing the law again, not through the lens of the Levites, but through the lens of all of the people. So there's a lot of repetition. There's some things that are going to sound very familiar, but that's because this is condensed version of the law for the whole community of Israel. So we've just got done taking the census, and we know that there are 600,000 fighting men. And so we know by the fact that God told them, take count of the men that you have who are able to fight, that there will be a battle coming up, and God is preparing them and getting them ready for it. And so this next chapter, chapter 5, talks about purity and being set apart. And so the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. Command the people of Israel to remove from the camp anyone who has a skin disease or a discharge or has been ceremonially unclean by touching a dead person. This command applies to men and women alike. Remove them so they will not defile the camp in which I live among them. So the Israelites did as the Lord had commanded and removed such people from the camp. Now remember, in Levite, there was that whole list, Leviticus, there was that whole list of the different discharges and the skin diseases and all the things that you had to, like, the priest took a look at and decided whether it was clean or unclean. This is the summary of that says, hey, somebody has developed something icky, possibly contagious, harmful, or hurtful. Make sure they're outside of the camp, and then the Levites will go and check on them there. So this is early quarantining procedures, pertinent and poignant for today still, that God gave us the wisdom from how to isolate people who might be harmful to others. Verse 5, then the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If any of the people, men or women, betray the Lord by doing wrong to another person, they are guilty. They must confess their sin and make full restitution for what they have done, adding an additional 20% and returning it to the person who was wronged. So this is, if you did something that was wrong and later realize that it's wrong, you don't just say, oh, I'm sorry, and it's done. There actually needs to be meaningful restitution when you have harmed someone. And this is part of our modern culture, this type of law giving, which is why when you are at fault, often you end up paying someone else's legal fees, or you end up having to make punitive damages. Those types of things that courts order are based on the idea that, you know, it's not just enough if you stole someone $500 to give them the $500 back, but you have to make account for the pain or suffering that was caused by your actions. And so God is setting this up to say, it's not okay to harm one another. And it's also not just eye for eye, tooth for a tooth in terms of reparation. So God limits how much we can punish one another and sets up that eye for eye, tooth for tooth. He says you can't go above and beyond when you're punishing people. But the other way going back, the grace, the restitution, the setting things to right, goes above and beyond with this 20%. But if the person who was wronged is dead, and there are no near relatives to whom restitution can be made, the payment belongs to the Lord and must be given to the priest. Those who are guilty must also bring a ram as a sacrifice, and they will be purified and made right with the Lord. So there's a big argument that's gone on for several centuries now about should reparations be made for slavery. And one of the ways that people have said, well, that would just be stupid, that wouldn't be something we should do, is that they're like, well, all those people who were harmed by that are dead. There are many Christian organizations actually working towards providing meaningful reparations to communities of color for slavery, because here in the Bible, it lays out that we make restitution even when the people are dead, even if we're just simply making restitution to God. And so while I won't enter into the foray one way or another of how reparations should be made, I do believe that it is important for us as Christians to look at communities that have been harmed and say, how can we be part of helping them to succeed and to fully embody the place in our culture and community that God has for them? So all the sacred offerings, I'm going to mute my ringer because apparently I didn't do that yet. All right. All the sacred offerings that the Israelites will bring to a priest belong to him, and each priest may keep the sacred donations that he receives. So if you make restitution to the Lord because there's no living relative to make restitution to, then that restitution belongs to the priest who offered the sacrifice for you. So we leave this portion of making restitution, and now we go into protecting marital faithfulness. So adultery is something that is taken very seriously in God's community. And in Leviticus, we learned that when a male and a female are caught in adultery, there's the death penalty for both of them. But what happens when you don't catch someone, or it's just a suspicion? And for those of us who are female, this may come a little bit, but bear out that this is a merciful God, and I'll explain why after we talk about what's going to happen. And the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. Suppose a man's wife goes astray and she's unfaithful to her husband and has sex with another man, but neither her husband nor anyone else knows about it. She has defiled herself, even though there was no witness, and she was not caught in the act. If her husband becomes jealous and is suspicious of his wife and needs to know whether or not she has defiled herself, the husband must bring his wife to the priest. He must also bring an offering of 2 quarts of barley flour to be presented on her behalf. Do not mix it with olive oil or frankincense, for it is a jealousy offering, an offering to prove whether or not she is guilty. The priest will then present her to stand trial before the Lord. He must take some holy water in a clay jar and pour it into dust, for he has taken from the tabernacle floor. When the priest has presented the woman before the Lord, he must unbind her hair and place in her hands the offering of proof, the jealousy offering, to determine whether her husband's suspicions are justified. The priest will stand before her holding the jar of bitter water that brings a curse to those who are guilty. The priest will then put the woman under oath and say to her, "If no other man has had sex with you and have not gone astray and defiled yourself while under your husband's authority, may you be immune from the effects of this bitter water that brings on the curse. But if you have gone astray by being unfaithful to your husband and have defiled yourself by having sex with another man," at this point, the priest must put the woman under oath by saying, "May the people know that the Lord's curse is upon you when he makes you infertile, causing your womb to shrivel and your abdomen to swell. Now may this water that brings the curse enter your body and cause your abdomen to swell and your womb to shrivel. And the woman will be required to say, 'Yes, let it be so.' And the priest will write these curses on a piece of leather and wash them off into the bitter water. He will make the woman drink the bitter water that brings on the curse. When the water enters her body, it will cause bitter suffering if she is guilty. The priest will then take the jealousy offering from the woman's hand, lift it up before the Lord, and carry it to the altar. He will take a handful of the flour as a token portion and burn it on the altar. He will require the woman to drink the water. If she has defiled herself by being unfaithful to her husband, the water that brings on the curse will cause bitter suffering. Her abdomen will swell and her womb will shrink, and her name will be a curse among her people. But if she has not defiled herself and is pure, then she will be unharmed and will still be able to have children. This is the ritual law for dealing with suspicion. If a woman goes astray and defiles herself while under her husband's authority, or if a man becomes jealous and is suspicious that his wife has been unfaithful, the husband must present his wife before the Lord, and the priest will apply this entire ritual to her. The husband will be innocent of any guilt in this matter, but his wife will be held accountable for her sin. Okay, let's break that down because that's a whole lot. And for those of us who have more modern understandings, feels a little icky. But let's take a moment to look at the culture of the time. The culture of the time very much treated women as property and very much as belonging to first their father and then to their husband whom they were given. Now, we know in Leviticus that there were all kinds of regulations and rules that governed proper sexual relations between men and women. And there were also rules for how a man had to provide for his wife. One of the great joys of reading the entire Bible is that you realize it's not all that patriarchal, although it has been used that way. For example, there's this lovely verse in the New Testament, "Wives, submit to your husbands." And that one's often quoted by some people with an agenda. But what follows it shortly thereafter is, "Men, love your wives as Christ loves the church. Be willing to die for them and to fulfill their needs." God provides for the care of women in a better way than the society around them. So rather than a man being able to just simply be suspicious or jealous or hurtful or punish his wife for something he has no proof or evidence of, God gives a way for there to be this test. Now, again, the woman is brought before the priest. There's really nothing that's going to happen to her that's wrong if she is innocent, because what is happening here? They're picking up some dust off the tabernacle floor. What does that mean, besides that she's drinking dirt? The dust symbolizes the presence of God. It's from the tabernacle where God is fully present. Therefore, for God to be fully present in this dust, which we are made from dust, for her to ingest it is to say that she is taking God in, and if she is doing so in a way that is unworthy, it will harm her. Now, Christians also share this type of thinking when we talk about how to consume the Eucharist or the feast without fully recognizing Christ within it can do us harm, or without doing so worthily. And so that's why we have a confession before we take communion. This woman is given an opportunity to confess before she takes this drink of bitter water. And the unbinding of her hair is symbolic of the state she would have been in if this sin had actually been committed. And the curse that talks about the shriveling of her womb in the Hebrew actually says, "May her thighs shrivel and her abdomen swell." So the places on her body that were part of the sin would be visibly and outwardly affected so that it would be made known and obvious. So either she did it and it will become outwardly apparent, or she didn't, and therefore she is free to continue to live her life with all the status and privilege of a beloved wife and have the rightful access to her husband's possessions and provision and care. So basically, you can't just get stupid, jealous, and angry with someone because you saw someone looking at her a different way and decide to write them out of your life. No, you have to do this before God. And so the one thing that people get a little twisted about this passage is this idea that infertility is a curse. This is not the only cause of infertility, and this passage is not meant to say that all women who are infertile have committed adultery. This passage is to say that if a woman is presented by her husband and submitted to this test and becomes infertile, it is a sign of her guilt. There was never meant to be an intention that infertility meant you were adulterous. This is only a portion of the whole scripture. And unfortunately, it's been applied out of context by people who haven't read the entirety and know that there are righteous and good women who go through infertility. But yes, so this is the other part that people sometimes get a little irked with is the sentence, the husband will be innocent of any guilt in this matter, but the wife will be held accountable for her sin. The husband is only held innocent if he takes his suspicions and instead of taking them out on his wife, brings her to the priest to do this ritual. He is only innocent if he participates in the prescribed way, and he is innocent if she's found guilty. It doesn't say he's innocent of any sin if no harm comes to her. And note what the offering that he has to bring is called: a jealousy offering. And that is sinful. And that's why they don't mix frankincense in with it, is because you don't mix the joyful smells of a grain offering that is holy to the Lord with the jealousy. So it's not as patriarchal or as icky as it sounds on first reading, but it's still something that I think many of us feel a little weird about when we read. And it's good that we have the context of Jesus, who in morning prayer this morning, we read the passage where the woman who was caught in adultery is brought before him. And Jesus's response is to scribble some words in the dirt and then ask them, well, any of you without sin may cast the first stone. And none of them do it because they're all guilty of sin. They're all guilty of either bearing false witness, because how did they witness her having adultery alone? So they're guilty already of breaking the law, because if they caught her with a man, they broke the law by not bringing the man with her and also stoning him, or they're bearing false witness and they didn't really catch her in the act. So Jesus says, no, go forth and sin no more. But it's a long progression to get to Christ. So now we have, going into chapter 6, Nazirite laws and Nazirite vows. First, I want to preface this with a vow of a Nazirite was generally temporary. This would have been a 30-day or a 60-day or a 90-day, a period of a few months where you would dedicate yourself and be set apart for the Lord for that time. We only have 2 or 3 examples in the scripture of people taking a permanent Nazirite vow. John the Baptist, Samson, and Jesus is described as being a Nazarene. But we know that Jesus isn't fully a Nazarene all the time because he takes wine. So some people have a perception of Jesus of Nazareth being permanently a Nazirite, but that's not accurate. All right, so let's go in. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If any of the people, either men or women, take this special vow of a Nazirite, setting themselves apart to the Lord in a special way, they must give up wine and other alcoholic drinks. They must not use vinegar made from wine or from other alcoholic drinks. They must not drink fresh grape juice, and they must not eat grapes or raisins." Now, why? How many of you have ever eaten a grape and realized, ooh, a little sour? That one was on its way to wine. Again, this is pre-refrigeration, pre-processes of pasteurization, and virtually any grape product was going to have already begun some state of fermentation or may have cross-contaminated and on its way towards alcohol. And so they just eliminated all grape products entirely. And as long as they are bound by their Nazirite vow, they are not allowed to eat or drink anything that comes from a grapevine, not even the grape seeds or the skin. They must never cut their hair throughout the time of their vow, for they are holy and set apart to the Lord. Until the time of their vow has been fulfilled, they must let their hair grow long, and they must not go near a dead body for the entire period of their vow to the Lord. Even if the dead person is their own father, mother, brother, or sister, they must not defile themselves, for the hair on their head is the symbol of their separation to God. This requirement applies as long as they are set apart to the Lord. Now, this is not as common of a practice as it used to be, but many people will take a period of time set apart to study God, to focus on God and healing their relationship with God. You know, people would go out into the desert for a time, or they would go out to the mountains to pray. And this would be a time where they would just lose track of some earthly things and focus on their God. So why the hair? For men, not touching the hair on their head or their beard would mean that they had more time in their day to focus on God. And for women, hair was already something that was generally covered or not braided or adorned in any particular way. But this time of not cutting it and then vowing to shave it off entirely is what they're vowing to do, is to forsake vanity and focus on God. So what happens, though, if someone falls dead beside them? The hair that they have dedicated will be defiled, and they must wait for 7 days and then shave their heads. Then they will be cleansed from their defilement. On the 8th day, they must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest will offer one of the birds for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, and in this way he will purify them from the guilt they incurred through contact with the dead body. Then they must reaffirm their commitment and let their hair, not their hand, that would be interesting, their hair begin to grow again. The days of their vow that were completed before their defilement no longer count. So they have to start over. And they must rededicate themselves to the Lord as a Nazirite for their full term of their vow. And each must bring a 1-year-old male lamb for a guilt offering. Again, dead bodies are seen as a source of pollution, a source of defilement, not just spiritually, but a carrier of disease. This is not an unreasonable thought process. And so if you want to have this dedication and this time of being set apart for God, you got to avoid dead people and dead bodies. This law is the ritual law for Nazirites. At the conclusion of the time of their separation as Nazirites, they must each go to the entrance of the tabernacle and offer their sacrifice to the Lord: a 1-year-old male lamb without defect for a burnt offering, a 1-year-old female lamb without defect for a sin offering, a ram without defect for a peace offering, a basket of bread made without yeast, cakes of choice flour mixed with olive oil, and wafers spread with olive oil, along with their prescribed grain offerings and liquid offerings. The priest will present these offerings before the Lord, first the sin offering and the burnt offering, then the ram for peace offering, along with the basket of bread made without yeast. The priest must also present the prescribed grain offering and liquid offering to the Lord. Then, after all of these offerings have been made, the Nazarites will shave their head at the entrance to the tabernacle, male or female. They will take that hair that has been dedicated and place it on the fire beneath the peace offering sacrifice. So this vow culminates in being fully at peace with God in your own body by letting something that grows out of it be taken off and burned. So the Nazarite vow is not, there's no thing that tells you when to do it or why to do it. It's something deeply personal for someone who, for whatever reason, is feeling like they need to be at peace with God. And this is a way that they can make that happen. There's also an element of privilege here involved because it's expensive. This is not just something to do willy-nilly. You got to have a couple animals to sacrifice and a whole bunch of grain. And only then do you shave your hair and finish the vow. So there's some thought that the people who kept the vow going longer than temporary were people who actually couldn't afford the sacrifices associated with the culminating ritual. But again, this is completely voluntary. This is not something God is saying you have to do. This is one of those things like when there is a hurricane coming and you pray, okay, God, if you spare me, I'm not going to drink again for 30 days or 60 days or for forever. These are those optional extra vows that people sometimes make out of their relationship with God. So this is the ritual law of the Nazarites who vow to bring these offerings to the Lord. And they may also bring additional offerings if they can afford it. So you could go even further if you wanted to. You know, there are people who are blessed to be able to chunk down a big old check whenever God leads them to it. And we say, thank you very much. Same thing back then. If they are led by God, they can do more. This is just the minimum as it's prescribed for this vow. And they must be careful to do whatever they vowed when they set themselves apart as Nazarites. So if you started this vow and you said, I'm going to do all of these things, to end it and finish it, you have to do what you said you were going to do. So this section ends, and here we have the priestly blessing. Now, this priestly blessing isn't just offered for the Nazarites, it's offered for everyone. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons to bless the people of Israel with this special blessing. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Whenever Aaron and his sons bless the people of Israel in my name, I myself will bless them. So there's this idea that priests are mediators of blessing, that the more faithful we are in extending God's blessing to God's people, God blesses us. We receive this sort of reciprocity, and we are not blessed when we fail to extend God's blessing to God's people. This type of mediated, blessed to be a blessing is a trend that carries on through Christ as the ultimate mediator. And we continue to have religious leaders and priests and deacons and all kinds of people who are set apart to serve God in a specific way. But the idea is that they are receiving a portion of what is intended for all, and it is only blessed when it is spread out. So that ends our section on Nazirite laws. It's also a little important note to realize Nazirites were lay people. Anybody could take a Nazirite vow. You didn't have to be a Levite. And so this was a way for people of any tribe affiliation to be set apart to serve and be dedicated to God for a specific time of their life. Otherwise, it was traditionally the Levites who were set apart for God on behalf of all the rest of Israel. So this is a foretaste of what we already know, which is God doesn't just work with specific genealogies or specific people, but that all are capable of forming a close and intimate relationship with God that is a calling, perhaps for a season, perhaps for life. All right, so now we're going to move on to offerings of dedication. So this is somewhat an extension of these ways of being set apart for God. But this is the big day. We've talked about all of the tabernacle and how it's built and how it's made, but this is when we're really going to dedicate it. And it's for everybody and the whole community of Israel. So on the day Moses set up the tabernacle, I love Moses. Moses speaks in the royal we sometimes. Moses tends to say, I did, or Moses did this. Moses had a lot of help. Moses set up the temple by observing and appointing and saying, you over there, this is your pole and your stand, and this, you do that, this and the other thing. So Moses gets the credit for setting up the temple, but he had a lot of help with all the Levites. So set apart as holy. He also anointed and set apart all its furnishings and the altar with its utensils. Then the leaders of the Israel, the tribal leaders who had registered the troops, came and brought their offerings. Together they brought 6 large wagons and 12 oxen. There was a wagon for every 2 leaders and an ox for each leader, and they presented these to the Lord in front of the tabernacle. Then the Lord said to Moses, receive their gifts and use these oxen and wagons for transporting the tabernacle. Distribute them among the Levites according to the work they have to do. So Moses took the wagons and the oxen and presented to the Levites. He gave 2 wagons and 4 oxen to the Gershonite division for their work. He gave 4 wagons and 8 oxen to the Meronite division for their work. And all their work was done under the leadership of Ithamar, son of Aaron the priest. But he gave none of the wagons or oxen to the Kohathite division, since they were required to carry the sacred objects of the tabernacle on their shoulders. So remember when we were talking about the various divisions and the pieces and parts that they had to take care of, the Kohathites were the beasts of burden for the most sacred and holy of objects. So all of those things that had to be wrapped in extra layer of cattle skin just so nobody accidentally touched it and defiled it or died themselves, all of that is carried by hand. At least it's supposed to be. But we know much later, the Israelites got tired of following these instructions and they make them boo-boo. And the Ark of the Covenant is on a wagon and it gets jostled and somebody reaches out to make sure it doesn't fall and they die. And some people go, well, that was rude. Why would God kill him for, reaching out and trying to make sure the Ark of the Covenant didn't fall to the ground? Because it wasn't supposed to be on a wagon in the first place. God made very specific instructions and there's lots of training on how to follow them. But the people of God don't for very long. But for right now, all is good, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. And the leaders also verse 10, also presented dedication gifts for the altar at the time it was anointed. They each placed their gifts before the altar, and the Lord said to Moses, let one leader bring his gift each day for the dedication of the altar. So verses 12 through 83, we are going to skip. You are welcome to read them at your leisure. This is all of the 12 days, which leader brought what, and how much. We're going to skip to the summary of the dedication offering, verse 84. So this was the dedication offering brought by the leaders of Israel at the time the altar was anointed. 12 silver platters, 12 silver basins, and 12 gold incense containers. Each silver platter weighed 3¼ pounds. Each silver basin weighed 1¾ pounds. And the total weight of the silver was 60 pounds, as measured by the sanctuary shekel. And each of the 12 gold containers was filled with incense that weighed 4 ounces, as measured by the sanctuary shekel. The total weight of gold was 3 pounds. 12 young bulls, 12 rams, 12 one-year-old lambs were donated for the burnt offerings. Along with the grain offerings, 12 male goats were brought for sin offerings, 24 bulls, 60 rams, 60 male goats, and 61-year-old male lambs were donated for peace offerings. This was the dedication offering for the altar after it was anointed. Whenever Moses went in the tabernacle to speak to the Lord, he heard the voice speaking to him between the 2 cherubim on the ark's cover, the place of atonement that rests on the ark of the covenant. The Lord spoke to him from there. All right, so we are going to stop there, and I'm going to end the recording and give you guys a chance to ask some questions about what we have talked about so far. So stop recording.